Now part of the Darkcast Network. Welcome to Indie Podcasts with a Dark Side. On a February morning in 1982, the town of Brighton, New York was rocked by a horrible discovery. A 29-year-old mother was found brutally murdered in her home with an axe lodged in her head. Her 3-year-old daughter was unharmed at the scene of this cold case tragedy. It's the case of Cathy Krausenek, right now on Love and Murder. Welcome, lambs. Welcome to a new episode of Love and Murder, your weekly true crime podcast telling you cases of heartbreak that turn to homicide. I am your host, Kai, and in today's episode, we're discussing a case that went cold and was later reopened. It actually left questions in my mind, and I want to see if you're going to feel the same way at the end of this episode. Before we begin, I want to say that this episode and all my episodes are sponsored by my lambs in Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder. Be sure to subscribe to Love and Murder right now on whatever platform you're listening on so you don't miss a case. If you didn't know, you can also subscribe to our Patreon so you don't have to hear intros like this or commercials, and you'll get extra Kai rants, bonuses, and you'll be a sponsor of Love and Murder. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. In the meantime, though, grab your butts, grab your BJ's apple juice, murderandlove.com/BJ's, and let's get into some Love and Murder. Kathleen Schlosser, who everyone called Cathy, and James Krausenek first crossed paths in the hallways of their small-town Michigan high school, where Cathy was a popular, friendly student, and James, who was into athletics and everything like that, kind of kept a lower profile. In college is when they actually started dating. They both went to Western Michigan University, and they ended up getting married on May 3rd, 1974. Cathy's cousin Susie described their wedding as a, quote, fancy princess-like deal. Soon after getting married, they moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, where Jim went to graduate school at the Colorado State University, and Cathy worked as an orthopedic therapist. By 1982, they had settled in Brighton, New York, where James had a new job as an economist at the Eastman Kodak, and they had, by this time, a 3-year-old daughter named Sarah. On February 19th, 1982, around 6:30 a.m., Jim left for work, and he didn't return home until around 4:50 p.m. When he got home from work, he said the garage door was open, and he saw broken glass on the floor by the front door, along with a maul. What's a maul? Do y'all know what a maul is? All right. So according to the Oxford Dictionary, a maul is, quote, a tool with a heavy head and a handle used for tasks such as ramming, crushing, and driving wedges. Okay, I understand now. So he saw broken glass on the floor by the front door and a maul. He said he then ran into the house and quickly ran upstairs to the master bedroom where he saw Cathy in bed in her PJs, well, her nightgown, and an axe was sticking out of her skull. So he ran to find his baby, and she was in the next room unharmed. He then did the only thing he could think of was he grabbed his child and he ran to the neighbor's house. The neighbor said that Jim came to her door, quote, clutching Sarah in his arms with the look of terror on his face. The neighbor then called 911 and told the operator that she thought that a murder had happened across the street at her neighbor's house. So at 5:03 p.m., police started arriving at the scene. Wow, that was fast. So he got from work at 4:50 and police started arriving at 5:03. Now, although police were not able to find significant forensic clues like fingerprints, for instance, what they did find was evidence of a staged burglary. Basically, there were valuable items scattered all over the dining room floor, including Cathy's purse, and there was this silver tea service and tray that was on the floor, but nobody took it. So it was really expensive and nobody even touched it. One of the windows in the back of the house was broken, but no footprints were found outside the back door. So they literally saw nothing was taken. Everything was there. Everything of value was there. So what kind of burglary was this? And then on top of that, both the axe and the maul belonged to the Krausenecks, and the axe was from the garage, and it had literally no fingerprints on it, which, I mean, if you do come in for a burglary, then you put gloves on, so that's not surprising. But what about the fingerprints of either Jim or Cathy, whoever originally hung it up? Shouldn't that have been on the axe? So investigators started looking at Jim because this wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This was a staged burglary. So they started looking at Jim. They later interviewed Sarah, who's like 3.5 at this time, and she said that she saw a, quote, bad man. But first she said the man had a hammer in his head. Then she said the man had an axe in his head. And she also said the man's face was, quote, many colors. So detectives started thinking that she wasn't really talking about a, quote, man at all, but instead she was talking about her mother, who she saw with an axe in her head, and then the many colors she was talking about was the blood that was covering her face. Poor kid. They then interviewed people who knew the couple, and, you know, those who knew Cathy talked about her fondly as a warm, loving person dedicated to her family. And her friend Kathy Behe described her as the same way, but she also told investigators that she noticed that something was going wrong in their marriage. So the last time she saw her was like 6 months ago, right before they moved into this house. And she said she thought there was like troubles in the marriage, but they couldn't really go into it. She didn't really talk about it, but she suspected that there was trouble in the marriage. While continuing with the investigation, police traced the Krausenecks' steps on the night before the murder, and they said that they shopped at a discount drugstore and made a bank deposit and then got home at around 8 p.m. So literally you just did regular stuff and got home, so nothing suspicious. Quote, people want a singular piece of evidence that can directly point to Jim. This is not one of those cases. You have to look at the totality of the circumstances. No other physical evidence at the scene, including DNA, points to anyone except James Krauseneck. The police chief continued on saying, quote, what we did not find was any evidence that points to anyone else in that home. That speaks volumes. There's no boogeyman out there. There's no outside party in the house during the commission of the crime. End quote. On February 20th, 1982, Cathy's body was taken away for autopsy. In the meantime, Jim no longer allowed investigators to speak with Sarah, but he did and agreed to another meeting with investigators that afternoon. So I understand why you wouldn't allow investigators to speak to your 3-year-old who literally keeps saying that she sees a bad man, which this is what she formulated in her head, with an axe sticking out the head and blood. Like, I don't want you to keep traumatizing my child, so I can understand that. You know, and it's good that he kept cooperating with the police, so he's supposed to meet them this afternoon. But when the time came for them to meet, Jim and Sarah had left the state to be with family in Michigan. Meanwhile, the medical examiner concluded that Cathy's cause of death was from a single axe blow to the head. So basically what he's saying is she was asleep and somebody came in and chopped her in the head and she immediately died. During the autopsy, the medical examiner found no evidence of sexual assault and narrowed Cathy's time of death to somewhere between 4:30 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. So basically, with no lack of real evidence, authorities couldn't prove that Jim had been home at the time she died, and they couldn't prove anything else. So there was no motive, he wasn't home, there was no evidence. So the case just ended up going cold. Let's take a moment for a commercial break to give you your weekly reminder to come on over and join the Lamb Supporters Club at one of our 3 locations. You can either do it at patreon.com/loveandmurder. You can do it at Spotify, or you can do it at Spreaker. All of the links are in the show notes below. And as an exclusive Lamb, you get intro and commercial free episodes and bonus episodes like Kai Rants. If you join in Patreon, you get even more options like case extras and options for more bonus episodes. So like for this episode we're doing, the case extras are pictures of the crime scene. I read off to you a statement that Jim made saying that he was innocent. and so much more. So if you're part of our Patreon, you get access to all of that starting at just a $3 a month donation tier. All of the links are in the show notes below, or you can go to patreon.com/loveandmurder. Come on over, give it a shot. What do you have to lose? Patreon.com/loveandmurder. Now you know which commercial is coming next. Join BJ's for savings on your groceries. In this economy, with prices going up, everything's going up except for our paychecks. You are looking for ways to save money. And I'm telling you, as someone who used to literally play, how can I save even more money grocery shopping? BJ's is one of those ways. As I keep telling y'all, I joined 2 years ago just as a test, and I literally just recently renewed my membership. So this is 3 years. This would be my third membership renewal. You save a ton of money with BJ's. You have to trust me on this. With BJ's, you get more bang for your buck. You get more options to shop. So you can actually go pick up your groceries. They'll do the shopping for you. You can have it delivered to you. You can have it delivered to your car, or you can go grocery shopping by yourself. Either way. Plus, on top of the already savings they give you even more coupons to apply to their already low prices. Try it out. And if you join using my link, murderandlove.com/BJ's, you get $35 off of your first year's membership. So that's even another savings that I'm bringing you. Now's the time to make your grocery shopping actually work for you. murderandlove.com/BJ's. And you know, I only bring you stuff that I use myself and that I believe in. murderandlove.com/BJ's for $35 off your first year membership. And now, back to the show. So with all that dying down, Jim and Sarah moved out to Washington State. And while he was there, he got married twice, but got divorced from both of them very quickly. In the meantime, Cathy's family, who initially thought that James would never be responsible for this murder, gradually started thinking that he was a suspect too, and started thinking, with the years passing by, that he was hiding something. Jim, on the other hand, was just out living his life and not a care in the world, raising his child, when, while at a trade show, he ran into a woman named Sharon James. Sharon was an old friend of his. And so they got to talking and they got to dating. They dated for 2 years and got married in 1999. Then in 2014, out of seemingly nowhere, a guy named Edward Larrabee, who was a career criminal who had been locked up on charges of attempted murder, sexual abuse, robbery, wrote up a confession stating that he was the one who killed Cathy. And he did this right before he died of ALS. However, when police read his confession, he saw that it had so many errors in it, it didn't match up to the facts of the case, and he called Cathy a brunette and heavyset when she wasn't, and he said he had sexually assaulted her and then killed her, when, as we know, they didn't find any evidence of sexual assault. So, with all these inconsistencies, it was basically a guy who was trying to get his last 15 minutes of fame, or somebody had paid him off and didn't give him the right answers. Whatever it was, prosecutors and investigators threw it out because it was trash. However, the good thing that did come out of this is because of that lie, eyes once again fell onto the case. And in April 2015, at the direction of former Brighton Police Chief Mark Henderson, a thorough review of the case was requested, including traveling to and interviewing potential witnesses and people who basically knew the family back then. In June of 2015, Chief Henderson and the then Captain Catholdi went to the FBI and requested their Buffalo Cold Case group. When they got in front of them, they presented the Krauseneck case to the group. They had a Q&A session, discussed the case, and then every single file was given over to the FBI to be digitized, because back in the 80s, everything wasn't on computers, everything was handwritten. So they took everything that was handwritten, every piece of evidence, every file, everything, and they digitized it and then got new eyes on the case. They also called Cathy's family to let them know that they were reopening this case and looking back into it. In April of 2016, the Brighton, New York investigators Mark Liberatore and Stephen Hunt went to talk to Jim, which was actually a surprise visit at his home in Washington State. During this visit, they questioned him. And Detective Liberatore asked Jim, just completely to his face, if he had anything to do with his wife's death. And Jim said, "I didn't kill her, no." And Detective Liberatore said, "Well, I don't agree with that. I think you did." In 2018, investigators got a different pathologist to look at the evidence. So they asked pathologist and former New York Chief Medical Examiner Michael Baden to look at it. In October 2019, after reviewing the autopsy report, toxicology reports, the scene, autopsy photographs, and police reports, Dr. Baden said that it looked like Cathy actually died around 3:30 a.m., which now means that Jim was home around that time. So now investigators took all of this evidence over to the court. And on November 1st, 2019, a grand jury indicted Jim. And 1 week later, he turned himself over to police in Rochester, New York. He pled not guilty and was released on a $100,000 bail after surrendering his passport. Now, by this time, he's 67 years old. Now, even though the prosecution and the defense had different theories of what happened, they did both acknowledge that with how long this case has been sitting there, how screwed up everything could be, like eyewitnesses and everything like that, they said to reopen this case and to actually bring it to trial will be a challenge. For instance, the key witness, one of the key witnesses, which was the original medical examiner, had already died. Also, records were currently scattered across multiple agencies, and, they would have to get, it was just a complete shit show, and it would just make the case harder to prove or disprove at this point in time. Jim's attorney also said that he had been more than cooperative with the police, but police came back and said that they, quote, disagree with your definition of cooperative in that context. So, in a pretrial ruling, the court denied the defensive motion to dismiss the indictment and allowed the case to proceed to trial. On September 6, 2022, 40 years after Cathy was killed in her sleep, Jim went to trial for her murder. Her daughter Sarah, who was now 44 years old herself, attended the trial to support her father. Monroe County District Attorney Sarah Dorsley said that she has, quote, absolutely no doubt that Jim Krausenek killed Cathy that day. Well, the defense attorney, Bill Easton, came back and said his client is innocent and said there was really no evidence that Jim killed his wife. So the prosecution decided to use the circumstantial evidence to build their case. Number one was the staged crime scene. Prosecutors claimed that the crime scene was staged to appear like a burglary gone wrong. There was a locked dog in the basement, and valuable items were not touched at all. They just were still right there, especially that silver tea set, which they could have grabbed while they were running back out of the house. The prosecution said that Jim did all of this to make a scenario that an intruder was in the house. Number two, they talked about potential motives. They pointed to signs of marital and career troubles as potential motives for Jim to want to kill Cathy. Basically, at that time, Kodak, where remember Jim was working at that time, had found out that Jim had not completed his PhD. He was literally like one class away, and I think he didn't do his dissertation, so he didn't have his PhD as he had initially told his job he did. So he was at the risk of being fired. He found this out on February 16th, and remember, February 19th is when she was killed. Number three, they pointed to timeline inconsistencies. They said that, remember, at first, back in the 80s, it was thought that she had died at like 4:30 to 6:30, which basically meant that Jim wasn't at home. But then when they gave this to Dr. Michael Baden in 2018, he actually pointed out that Cathy more than likely died around 3:30 a.m., which meant that Jim was home at that time. And finally, they pointed to forensic clues, like a faint shoe print that was found around the house. So they did end up finding a very, very faint shoe print. They also said the axe came from the house itself. There was no fingerprints on the axe. So it's like none at all. Not even yours. Like I said before, not even yours who hung it up. No fingerprints on the axe at all. And no fingerprints around certain areas of the house where there should have been fingerprints. Prosecutors called an expert witness who then testified that this faint footprint that they had been found inside a trash bag and was from a special type of shoe, which was called a boat shoe. And if you look back in the crime scene photos, which I have it listed in our Patreon, patreon.com/loveandmurder, there was a pair of boat shoes in their bedroom. However, because authorities didn't really piece that together back then in 1982, these shoes were never tested to see if they were a match. So the defense jumped on that and said, there you have it. You have the wrong man and you have the wrong theory. They decided to say that all of this is circumstantial evidence, which really it is. And they decided to, number one, question the delay. Why are you trying to open this after 40 years? There's no new evidence. There's no new anything, only a fresh new opinion from a pathologist about the time of death. They also said, number two, there was actually a violent sexual predator who lived near the Krausenecks at the time in 1982. His name was Edward Larrabee, and by this time he was dead. They're saying that he could have done this. They actually said that he had allegedly confessed to killing Cathy before he died in 2014. However, if you remember, there were so many inconsistencies and everything in his confession that police threw it out. So, I guess his defense was grasping at straws, but then again, so is the prosecution. Number three, the third thing they had to bring forward was the time of death. They said that this new forensic pathologist, Dr. Baden, said that the time of death was before Jim went to work. However, they said that Dr. Baden's report lacked scientific reliability. How would you know? It was 40 years ago. And finally, like I said, they said this was all circumstantial evidence. And they said that they should look towards the criminal Larrabee. That's the person who did it. He confessed to it. It made more sense. And they rest their case. That was their whole case. So on September 22nd, 2022, closing arguments were heard. And the next morning, the court handed the case over to the jury. Basically, it was up to the jury to determine whether or not Jim was guilty. So, after deliberating for less than 10 hours on September 26, 2022, the jury found Jim guilty of second-degree murder. They said that what swayed them to the ruling of guilty was that it was just too, quote, perfect. The house was too perfect. There was no DNA evidence. The staging was too perfect. The suspicious use of an axe that was from their garage, and they just couldn't fathom why a burglar would just walk in and kill a sleeping victim when they could have just walked in and taken stuff and left. Usually, burglars don't want confrontation. They just want to come in your house, get what they get, and leave. Well, there was no burglary. There was only a murder, so it just didn't make sense. And the Krausenecks had only been there for like 6 months, so it just wasn't making sense to them. They also dismissed the claim about Edward Larrabee and said that the defense was using that as a, quote, smokescreen. And yeah, this is why they said he was guilty. On November 7th, 2022, during sentencing, Sarah, their daughter, read a statement where she said she was very disappointed with the verdict. Quote, "My mother's killer got away with the murder, and my father's life has been taken by a failed justice system that convicted him of a crime he did not commit." Then Jim, who's 71 at this time, spoke to the court for the first time. He said he loved Cathy and he was innocent. Quote, "In closing, I did not murder Cathy. I love Cathy with all my heart and with all my soul," he said. Sharon said that they plan to appeal the jury's guilty verdict, quote, so that justice can truly and honestly be served. In the meantime, the judge said, I understand all of that. It was a very difficult case. However, I do sentence Jim to 25 years in prison. And at 71, that's literally a life sentence. So they did plan to appeal. However, before Jim could do any kind of appeal, in May of 2023, just 6 months after his sentencing, he died of cancer in prison. And that is the case of Jim and Cathy Krausenek. What did you think of this case? As I kept saying, and as literally everybody kept saying, all of the evidence was circumstantial and there was no physical evidence to tie the crime to literally anyone. Now, as I said before, I'm going to put pictures of the crime scene into Patreon so you can see for yourself, patreon.com/loveandmurder. And also I'm going to read off the statement that Jim had made stating that he loved his wife and he was innocent. It's a longer statement than just that one sentence that I gave you. So I'll be putting that in the Patreon as well. So the poll that I have for this episode is, based on the information given, do you think Jim was innocent or guilty? So I want to hear from you. So you could answer the poll in a multiple of ways. One way you could do it is on Spotify. Another way you could do it is in my new WhatsApp group, murderandlove.com/WhatsApp. So I would definitely love to hear on you. And basically, if you say he's innocent or he's guilty, I want to hear why. If you could tell me your why in the comments below, I look forward to reading that in the next episode. And that is all I have for you today. My mouth does hurt, so I'm going to cut this short. I know I usually read your comments, but trying to cut this short because my mouth hurts. If you listen back, you'll understand why my mouth hurts. But anyways, that's all I have for you. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, go ahead and answer that poll question, murderandlove.com/WhatsApp, or you can answer that in Spotify. And I will see you in the next episode. And don't forget that a free and easy way to help out Love and Murder is by simply sharing this episode. So right now, go ahead and hit that share icon on your phone. Just go ahead and hit share. Share it to your mom, share it to your dad, share it to your brother, share it to your sister, share it to your friends, share it to your Instagram. Share, 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 share. And as usual, I end each episode by reminding you that it's, say it with me now, all love and no murder, y'all. Stay tuned for my commercial guest.
Hey, I'm Gina.
And I'm Amber.
And we're here to bring you the Weird True Crime Podcast, where we cover true crime cases that will leave you asking yourself, did that really happen?
We'll dive into questionable cases throughout history that are solved, unsolved, or just plain unbelievable.
We'll also talk about the quirkier side of true crime in episodes we like to call What the F*** Wednesday.
So be sure to subscribe and listen on your favorite podcast service.